All right, can see everyone piling in now, which is good. Bit of a draw card, Richard.
Yeah, too right. Yeah, see the trickling in. That's good. Welcome everyone.
We'll just give it a couple of minutes for everyone to come through, and then we'll kick off. Hey.
Sounds good. Sounds great.
Just while everyone is coming through, a quick reminder over on the right in the questions box. If you've got any questions as we go, feel free to put them in there, and if I can squeeze it into, I'll pass it across to Richard as we go. I will, otherwise we'll try and get to them all at the end of the webinar. Let's give it a couple more moments and we might kick off.
Cool.
All right, it looks like it's starting to flatten out a bit. We might start, Richard, if that's all right with you.
Awesome. Yep, that sounds good. Let's crack into it.
Very good. So firstly, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar, partner between JobAdder and Intelligent. And yeah, as you can see there, we'll be talking today about keeping candidates engaged remotely and with some special attention on gamification, which I'm looking forward to. I'm Michael Osman. I'm the head of people and performance at JobAdder. So my team oversees talent acquisition here, amongst some other key people and culture initiatives. I've been here for about 9 months, and very much we're focusing on developing processes and supporting our leaders to attract, retain, and manage some really good people. So Richard, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name's Richard Thwaite. I'm the head of product at Intelligent. So Intelligent, we're a psychometric assessment company. So we help companies big and small all over the world to attract and retain talent. And my role specifically, I'm involved in ensuring that all of our products are fit for purpose and they're meeting the ever-changing, ever-evolving needs of our client base. Good to be here today.
Very good, and I'll apologise to everyone for the moustache. So hopefully everyone's focusing on the slides and not my poor attempt at a moustache. But yeah, so the purpose of today's webinar, not to sell, but to provide some real life examples to our audience and some tips about how we can keep candidates engaged whilst we're recruiting remotely. We're going to touch specifically on how gamification can help us do that, and some really cool examples of how that's done across our industry, but also across broader business as well. So a little bit on the structure for the topics that we're going to touch on today. We're going to talk about the importance of a positive candidate experience and journey. We talk about optimizing the application process. We're going to speak about employer branding. Richard's going to touch on learning agility. We're going to run through some gamification case studies from Intelligent, as well as some others out there in industry. And we're going to finish with screening candidates efficiently and a bit on self-expression, and obviously try to get to some questions as we go. So for those that weren't here right at the start, if you want to populate any questions you've got as we go in the question box on the right, we'll try and address them as we go, or we'll group a couple together at the end. How does that sound, Rich?
Sounds great. Sounds great.
All right, so let's kick it off. So Richard, talk us through what candidate experience means to you specifically, and what it involves, and why it's so important.
Sure. So candidate experience simply is every interaction that a candidate has with your business through the application process. So that's everything from attraction and sourcing all the way up to the point of hire. It includes every career page, every job ad, every email back and forward. And we see it as something that is really really critical. The numbers tell us that it is really important to ensure that you've got a good candidate experience going. 78% of people will tell their family and friends about a bad experience, and many of those will post about it on social media. So, as software vendors and recruitment specialists, we need to ensure that we are driving positive candidate experiences. And it's actually, we have a real duty of care to our candidates. All of our candidates are they're looking for the next job, they're looking for their next role, and so we need to ensure that the process is as streamlined as possible for them, and there are no blocks for them at all. It's something that we monitor really closely, and is critical for everyone involved.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also when we're looking in this space, especially if we're recruiting in, they may not be a staff member there and then, or might not be successful in that particular role, but they could definitely be in the future. But they could also be, a current client, a future client, or an advocate for our products as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really interesting case study actually that Virgin Media did a few years ago, and on the cost of a bad candidate experience, and they found that a bad candidate experience was actually costing them about $5 million a year from people who'd applied for a role, hadn't got it, and then had actually cancelled their subscription and were no longer clients. So it's definitely something that there is a fiscal bottom line impact as well.
Exactly. And I try to, to personally move, if we're looking at our onboarding process here, we say that starts with the first call when we're dealing with the client initially on the phone, and how that was, and the person they were dealing with, and the information, and sort of the level of the intelligence in that conversation as well, because that's going to influence, their decision at the end of the day, especially for the top people that are looking around and that are in hot demand as well.
Yeah, it can really set you aside and set you apart from other businesses who may be in your space.
Definitely. All right. So moving on to optimizing the application process, can you talk our audience through the shift in focus from traditional methods of job applications to more modern methods, and what that means for candidates?
Yeah, sure. So in the past, the application process has been very employer focused rather than being candidate centric. So what that means is there's been a focus on all of the data that needs to be gathered, and making sure that everything is coming into your systems and coming into your processes. But there hasn't been as much guidance and as much focus given to how the candidates are actually feeling through that process. So that's something that needs to be continuously reviewed and enhanced. Two key ways of doing that are, firstly, is actually mapping out the process. So just doing a process map, ensuring that the process isn't too long or too difficult for candidates, that it is it's the same as you expect it to be. It's always a bit of a red flag for us when a recruitment lead hasn't been through their own process in a little while, because things can change, and small tweaks can become big impacts. And the second way that we can actually improve and optimize our processes are learning from our colleagues in design. So actually being design led and optimizing some good design thinking. Maybe that is talking to candidates or talking to employees who have just been hired and getting their feedback on the process, or maybe that's really going above and beyond and actually reaching out to a candidate who hasn't finished the application process and finding out why and asking them some good questions about that.
I might just get you to flick that slide over if you can, Rich.
Sure.
There we go. And yeah, and I definitely think that as well. There's a lot of, us being in HR and other HR professionals, there's as much reading you can do and looking at sort of best practice, but until we actually get feedback from people live running through that process, or a week or a month outside of that, and get them to provide us with some genuine, honest feedback about the process or other processes they might be going through simultaneously with competitors or in different industries, and why, and what they thought was stronger, could be done better. Yeah, because it's constantly evolving, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not a set and forget. It's something that you do want to be reviewing on a regular basis. Definitely.
And a big part of my role, or definitely I see needs to be part of my role moving into the future, is around employer branding. And so I'm interested to hear your thoughts about the role that employer branding plays in keeping candidates engaged. And yeah, I won't take the answer away from you, but I think we're both on the same page that transparency is a priority throughout this process as well.
Transparency is super key. It's so important that your candidates have very clear expectations about what to expect from the business that they're looking to join. And there's kind of two aspects to that. The first is organizational culture. So actually displaying your values loudly and proudly, putting them on your website, putting them on your careers page, having them intermingled through the applicant journey. And so it's very clear to candidates what they can expect coming into the process, and also the job fit. So what they can expect on the job, what the good things are about the role, what the potentially the realistic, the less good things may be, and having that combination of things, allowing people to look at the process with a very clear set of eyes and understand exactly what they're moving into. We've seen clients who do the little things well, so getting the all of the email comms being very authentic, all of the coloring, the logos, everything from start to finish being a seamless experience. That's where we see real success.
I'm going to get you to click across the slides again, mate. One more time, and that's 3 strikes. So yeah, and on that, and I definitely think, from an organization's perspective around transparency, and honesty and authenticity through that process, should be a priority for both the candidate and the hirer as well, because we want to make sure that expectations are aligned. We want to push the positive things about our organizations, and that's our point of difference and competitive advantage, but we don't want someone coming into the business on promises that we can't fulfill as well. So I know I try and be as honest and genuine as I can through that process, and encourage that for all of my hiring managers as well, even when they see that really good talent that they know that would come into the business and add a lot of value, to just make sure they're being transparent.
Absolutely. And really communicating to the employee exactly as you said, why they should want to join your business and your organization. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that leads well into the next question that I've got, and I'm interested to hear about your take and thoughts on realistic job previews.
I think they're great. I think you should definitely use them. I think they're a really important tool for setting expectations of candidates. We've seen one of our clients in the aged care industry. They've used realistic job preview right up front in the process, and that's really helped them with selection. So candidates self-selecting both in and out of the process, and that allows them to have higher quality talent and talent that's really more invested in the process. And then from an outcome standpoint, that links through into turnover. So reduced turnover. If you're bringing people into the organization who buy into the mission and buy into the underlying goals of the organization, they're going to be more resilient employees who are less likely to then leave the organization as well.
Yeah, definitely. And on to some of the exciting stuff now. And I really enjoyed my research on this and the conversations that we'd had a little bit earlier this week, and more specifically, some of the cool examples around the world. I got caught up in the US Air Force game yesterday, and I shared that with a couple of people internally within the organization. But first and foremost, can you talk our audience through and about specifically what gamification is?
So gamification is where you take a traditional experience and you add gamified elements into it. So gamified elements being things that drive enjoyment and things that drive engagement. There's a framework that we use internally called Octalysis, and that identifies kind of eight key facets of a game experience. So that's things like unpredictability, things like giving candidates a sense of meaning and accomplishment. And this is becoming more and more important in the world that we live in today, because many of our candidates are growing up with technology. They're growing up in the digital age. They're expecting really high quality digital experiences, and not just from a recruitment context, it can really add enjoyment, and it can make what are traditionally, potentially not as enjoyable concepts quite fun and quite good for candidates to do.
Cool, very good. Just a reminder for everyone that's joining us today, if you've got any questions as we go, feel free to populate those into the questions box on the right, and I can ask Richard if I can as we go. So, but yeah, back to gamification. So, talk us through learning agility, and I suppose that concept and how that relates into a gamification.
Yeah, so learning agility is one of the concepts that we've seen measured really effectively through gamification. So what this is the ability for candidates to come into an organization, be presented with new and novel information, and learn that quickly. So what that links to on the job is it means that people are going to have a faster ramp up time, so they're going to be productive sooner on the job, and that leads to a higher quality, a better quality of hire, and higher performing employees down the line. What we've seen in gamification is this is something that can be measured up front. So what you're seeing on the screen, that's an example of an item that is used to measure learning agility rather through gamification, and we've seen that is actually predictive. So that is predictive of performance when we take an assessment score, when we take an employee score at point A and then look at their performance at point B, there is a significant correlation between those 2 points. So it's definitely something that is worth looking at and worth measuring through the process.
Yeah, and I suppose, well, that would be that's an obvious benefit for gamification throughout the recruitment process. But in your experience, what would you say some of the other main benefits are of gamification?
I'd say some of the other benefits are specifically when it's designed for early careers or graduate hire, really giving candidates what they need. One only needs to go to a graduate forum like Whirlpool to see that grads aren't just happy with the traditional ways and the ways that we've been doing things for years. They actually do want change, and they're actually flocking towards recruitment processes that have more of these elements throughout. So that'd be one key benefit. The second key benefit would be how it creates more of a two-way conversation with candidates. So instead of it just being a one-way interaction when we are taking information from the candidate, it's actually a chance to give information back. So along the lines of that realistic job preview, employer branding, those topics that we've discussed, it also allows people to feel like what it would be, a task that they might actually face in the organization. And then of course the ability to predict. So the ability to predict some of these really important on-the-job competencies, things that are going to lead to high-quality employees that are going to excel, and doing that in an objective and bias-free way.
And yeah, moving on to my next comment or my next question in terms of something that I'm very conscious of throughout the recruitment process around bias, and my own unconscious bias, especially I know if I'm looking for managers or people managers, I'm quite conscious that when I look at in my past people who I've enjoyed working for and their style, I need to be conscious that I'm not making decisions based on someone mirroring how that person's management style. But can you talk a little bit about the role that gamification can play in removing bias in the selection process?
Yeah, absolutely. So gamification is one of the many tools that can be used to remove bias. So really, bias creeps into selection processes when there's too much human involvement in the wrong ways. So when people are making decisions based on factors that are not actually going to link to high performers on the job. So there's many things like, for example, just looking at resumes is shown to actually be quite a poor predictor in and of itself on future job performance. So gamification is a way that we can start to gather some of that data, but we're doing it in a way that's not going to lead to high levels of drop off through the assessment experience. So it's all very well and good creating a solid and robust framework, but if it's not enjoyable for candidates to do, or it's too long, then you're going to get candidates selecting out of that process. So that's really gamification can be the input or the layer over tools that can ensure that we're not adding bias into our recruitment process and we're making good, defensible, scalable hiring decisions.
Okay, so we had a couple of chats around a few case studies that that Taligent have been working through or working with, but also some others out in the industry. But there was one particular one for one of your big global clients, and I think to be safe, we might withhold the name, but I think the details of that, as much as you can share, if you can take the audience through that, and yeah, some of the data and the benefits and things like that from that big global client that you guys are working with.
Definitely. So this client in particular, a few years ago, they implemented gamification very early in their selection process. So it's actually the very first thing that candidates hit, following on from their, just a very simple application. This was fully tailored to their needs and the types of roles that they would have, types of tasks that they would have across a number of different roles. 65,000 candidates a year coming through this assessment, and where some of the real benefits are is there was an incredibly low dropout rate. So 99% of the people who were starting the assessment were actually completing the assessment. That was all fully integrated with the applicant tracking system, fully integrated with other parts of their candidate experience in terms of their brand and their authenticity and their language coming through. And not only did we have these great metrics that we could see based on the candidate looking at the data, we also have implemented with that client specific surveys to candidates. So high levels of enjoyment and engagement, and a very easy to use experience. So that assessment rather has led to them having higher numbers of candidates through, and they're operating in quite a competitive consulting market. So that means that they want to ensure that they're not candidates aren't also going, candidates who would also be applying with their competitors are actually finishing the assessment process with them, and they can get to that top talent faster. So it really has been a very beneficial experience for them, and something that has really changed the way that they look at gamification and look at the ways that it can actually be used in their process.
Very good, thanks, mate. And we also discussed a few external examples that weren't all necessarily relating to recruitment, but what are some of your favorite examples around the world?
Definitely the game that you've discussed, the Air Force game. I think that's fantastic. I see quite good gamification in a non-recruitment area, the Nike Run Club. So elements of giving people a sense of accomplishment, elements of social influence as well. So the ability for you to compare your run times with friends and have groups of individuals competing together. All things that really aid to the enjoyability of the experience. There's also a case study, a tool that was done by the Australian Open, which is a virtual reality tool for Seiko, which includes elements of engaging people who are coming into the Australian Open and actually giving them a chance to try out in virtual reality as a tennis player. So yeah, quite cool aspects and cool ways of making experiences better for people who are going through them.
Yeah, definitely. I know. Yeah, some of that's obviously customer engagement and fan engagement. But at the end of the day, it's all engagement. And I think that tennis example specifically was giving fans an opportunity to return serve from your Roger Federer, your Rafael Nadal. So yeah, pretty cool way that that you can adapt that to engagement at a variety of levels. Just for everyone, all of our audience, we'll share these links to some of these external examples following the webinar as well, so everyone can have a look and a play around themselves. All right, Rich, on to the screening process. So talk us through your tips here on keeping candidates engaged in this part of the process.
So once they get to the screening process, hopefully the application process to date hasn't been too painful. It's been quite short for them. But three key ways where you can improve your screening process is firstly using video up front. So be that just a short, sharp clip of explaining some of the elements to the job to the candidate, or just thanking them for getting to this part of the process. The second being using tools that are face valid, so tools that it's obvious to the candidate why they're completing them. If they're going for an accounting role, then they're doing a numerical reasoning test, and that is making sense. And the way, what we're seeing lately, especially, is we're seeing a lot of use of video interview tools. So actually engaging with a candidate while we're in this remote world, and being able to gain information and gain insight while still being remote, obviously. And the third way is through authenticity. So through all of the touch points of the candidate, making sure that that is a seamless experience. So your logos, your branding, your imagery and language going throughout the process. Because especially in the screening stage, it's not just about the software you're using. You've got to consider what comes before the software, what comes after the software, and making sure that everything is seamless. So if you're a candidate going through the experience, that will help drive your engagement, and you will gain the information you need as a recruitment team and a recruitment organization, but it's also engaging for candidates.
Okay, and being in HR for a while now, I know about the benefits and the needs for people across the business in terms of feedback. And yeah, moving on from the screening process, and especially for candidates who might be unsuccessful, can you talk about how we can keep our candidates engaged when we're at the pointy end of the process, and dealing with unsuccessful candidates, and just referring specifically to feedback?
Absolutely. So the first thing I'd say is that feedback is a two-way street. So there's the importance of delivering feedback to candidates. So be that through giving them reporting output of how they've done, having well-crafted emails, even just updating them through a simple candidate portal, all really effective ways to build that positive relationship. Because most candidates don't get feedback. 2/3 of candidates actually don't get feedback, or get very minimal feedback through the recruitment process. So that's definitely the first way, is of making sure that you are. And if you're working at high volume, that can be difficult. You need to automate it thoughtfully, which can be a challenge, but it is something that definitely gives you payoff. And the second would be actually asking for feedback from candidates. So especially at every decision point, especially where you're having candidates coming in and out of the process, you want to be making sure that you're asking them for how they're finding it. So knowing your net promoter scores, knowing your your candidate satisfaction scores, knowing your candidate effort scores, all things that are important to track and optimize. And especially where you're doing, if you might only be having a drive a couple of times a year, it gives you the ability to ask these questions and actually iterate and review and improve your process, which is really important for your view in the market and how people are perceiving you in the market.
Very good. All right, we might throw over to the audience for some questions. So I've got one or two that have come through as we've been going. Right. But just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, if you want to pop those through now, and we'll try and address them as we go. Right, so the first one, what are some practical first steps for us as a small, medium-sized business with a small budget? If we want to access some of the benefits of gamification, I wouldn't know where to start.
Sure, okay. So what I would say to you is the first thing that you want to do when you are looking at improving a process is optimizing your goals. So making sure that you know what area is, especially when you've got a small budget to work with, knowing what is the area that is in most need of targeting. So is it sourcing? Is it screening? Is it learning and development? That's the first step that I would take, is actually doing that internal work and identifying where you want to target. The second would be, I would say that these days gamification, especially in HR technology, is really prevalent. So a few years ago, there weren't many vendors doing it, and those that were, it was incredibly customized, and you had to pay megabucks to get it up and going. But these days, there are a lot of out-of-the-box solutions where you can turn them on, and they can integrate with your ATS, or they can integrate with other systems, and you can be getting up and going reasonably quickly. So I guess that's the first. That's kind of what I would say is targeting an area where you're going to get the most ROI, and then doing your research and looking at vendors who are in the space. Even talking to other organizations and learning what they do can be a really effective way to start to get the ball rolling there.
Okay, I've got another question that's come through, asking about any examples that you might have where gamification is used to recruit for senior or executive level roles.
Sure. So senior executive level roles, the first thing I'd say is that we do see, when they are used for senior exec level roles, we do see the tools being useful. So we do see them still predicting across different professional contexts. So it's not just something that works for early careers or just something that works for executive hire. It can be used across the board. We do see more movement in the gamification space for that early careers. It does kind of skew towards your graduate hiring, and that's because typically the engagement levels there are lower at any individual application because there's more on the go, and also because when you're dealing with higher volume, you do want to make sure that you're driving engagement across a range of people. So that's the answer I'd say to your question, is that it definitely can be used, but again, it's got to be the right tool for the job. Engagement levels are often higher in the senior executive space, so often traditional measures work as effectively.
Okay. And a question here about whether you can talk to an example of or your knowledge of how gamification integrates with an ATS and engages candidates.
Sure. So often the way that we would see that working is if it would be in your in the way that the candidate is interacting. So if you've got a candidate interacting with an ATS up front, then it would be moving, as they move through the process, the different tools, introducing gamification elements into each of those. So for example, in the assessment space, adding in context of gamification and elements such as that feedback element and giving levels of accomplishment and meaning to candidates as they go through individual tools, and then having data that's been gathered from gamification flowing back into your applicant tracking system. And also potentially when you're crafting, say, email communications that are coming out of your applicant tracking system, making sure that those, adding in gamification elements like that, like letting them know how far through they are, so being very explicit about, say, the progress that they've made. There are a lot of ways that gamification elements can be added without actually something being a game. And okay. I would definitely refer you as well. There's the Octalysis framework is a great one for games. Definitely something to look up and use and take aspects of that for your context.
And I've got one more question here. So if anyone else has a question, if they want to flick that through, but a question here around AI. So Rich, how does artificial intelligence play a part in the gamification conversation?
Sure. So think of gamification as the layer and the mechanism, and then AI as the model. So AI is how we can take this gamification data and process it to draw really valuable and interesting conclusions. In the world of, especially in the world of recruitment, we get a lot of really diverse data, so unstructured data, and that's where AI can really add a lot of value, in that we can process that unstructured data and find rules and relationships between it that potentially we might not be able to with traditional methods. So you can actually have the combination of gamified assessment or gamified tools and artificial intelligence underpinning that, and having those together to create really robust solutions and robust selection methods.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that have come through. So thank you for everyone that sent those through.
Cool.
So we might finish up here, Richard. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and to learn from you. And I just want to make a quick mention to Sasha at Telligent as well, who did a lot of work in the back end and putting today together and getting some of our content together as well. As you can see down the bottom, to everyone who's still there, Richard and I have our emails up there on the final slide. We're both happy to answer any questions.
Absolutely.
if we, if some come through before we log off today, we'll definitely follow up those questions. And Sasha and Christina at JobAdder also mentioned that the recording will be made available, so just so everyone's aware of that. But thank you all for listening, and thank you again, Richard, and
Thank you,
have
Michael.
a good weekend.
Thank you so
No
much.
worries. See you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See you.